Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 922 of the series. And we have a weather that's clearing up to some extent. It's getting a bit warmer. I can hear buzzing bees and wasps and also some bumblebees around here. I was thinking today to mention something about Robert Malleola, the Italo-American philosopher slash deconstructionist that is very talented in understanding deconstruction and what is logocentrism. It is, like most of the books I mention here in this series, vastly complicated, and it is not something that it is easily accessible, not at all. But I've been reading his book since at least 2002, so maybe with that all knowledge and that paired with what I've learned from Robert Gachet, and of course this new knowledge coming from Susie Frobel, that hugely enlarged the understanding of what is deconstruction, what is its aim, how does it relate to a truer sense of the text, and where do we, so to speak, go wrong. It is not exactly wrong in the old sense, but it's more wrong in the sense of we are taken to a place that is not really fitting, and we cannot read the text, we can't understand the text. One way, and this is similar, he has different methods. One method never will do when it comes to getting closer to deconstruction. And the reason for that is that it defies description. It's pre-ontological in the same way as the ontological itself is constructed of something that came before. Something much more coercive, stronger, and convincing. To be very precise, it's only reality itself that can show us the path. Only through reality itself can we come to a deeper understanding. If we stay at the conceptual level, the level one could say is before deconstruction, we do not enter anything, and we will be only renaming. So the conceptual learning of today is sheer and purely just a renaming process. Nothing beyond the very renaming. I think, Kalle Lundard, you had a great example when it comes to original. I forgot the phrase, but it was clearly a renaming of original. Something like first-hand source or first source compared to others. And this renaming, it's a little like a makeup you put on if you got a big zit somewhere and you don't want it to show. It doesn't get rid of the zit, but it gives a zest of a newness. We have not truly entered the text to any degree, nor any level. So One way at looking at deconstruction is the regular take, starting with Saussure and the signified and signifier. At page 15 in the book, the chapter Between the Tao, Derridian Differentialism, we read the following: "But we have just used the word tentative very advisedly, for the concentric model which supports the theory of signifieds and signifiers literally implodes, turns inside out, and dissolves when signified rather than signifiers ring the rim." Let us describe the scenario. This is good. This is why I like Magliola. You always get really vivid example. If signifieds ring the rim and have been outermost in each link of the many chains leading to the rim, the innermost end of each link is a signifier, and more importantly, the center itself is a signifier. But such a situation is absurd, as signifier can't be center. First of all, how can an initial signifier mirror, as it must by way of its specific function, the countless signifieds ringing the circumference? By definition, a signified can be mirrored or signified by multiple signifiers. But by definition, a signifier cannot mirror multiple signifieds. For an initial signifier to do so is for it to fragment in all directions, to explode and disperse, and at the circumferential rim signifies deprived of a center within, both implode, head towards the natural locus of a signified in the model, and float loose. The linguistic model is no longer closed, but spread, randomness, drift, derive. Second, bivalence depends on form and idea and logic to be signified. If, as in the single word, matter, sound, and phonic form and random mutation are the signified, then form, idea, and logic as the signifier, the mirror, are at their irrational mercy. A kindred consideration is the following, namely that the relation of all other language to the initial word at the center is, according to the tradition, the relation of sense to sound, but in macrocosm. To deconstruct this scenario, Derrida need only buy into it long enough to show that all other language is analogous to sound as signified in the single word, and the macrocosmic initial word is analogous to sound's mirror. Then just as sound subverts idea, language subverts its central word. In the case of all these arguments, the linguistic universe, founded as it is on a logocentric model, collapses. And the bivalence, which controls word-to-word concatenations, also terminates whether the linkage be traditional or whether they be in Derridian modal reversal. I think this calls for some sort of illustration. Here you see the different formats, how it goes for the inward thrust from the signified to the signifier, which is the outward thrust. Here we have the signifier going from the signified into the signifier. And here we have the signified slash signifier going to signified and signified. And here we have this last stated thing, number 4. Signified goes to signifier goes to signified in multiple ways. That is a very complicated way of looking at deconstruction, but all of a sudden we can see that the whole idea of Saussure is dependent on this specific centrism, so to speak, and without arguing or without subverting or changing the text of Saussure, Derrida shows that there is a centrism going on, both in the written text of Saussure and his discourse, his speeches, but also in our reading or listening to it. So we are both partaking in the same movement. We are not outside. And this, of course, helps even more to understand the mirror image of Rudolf Gachet. In that you can understand how things starts. By looking into the image, the mirror image, you start thinking there must be some sort of original somewhere, and that original is more truer than what is getting reflected. We are caught by this non-illusion, which is very important to state. It's not an illusion. It is part and parcel of real reality. This is real reality that we need to deconstruct. And that's why Derrida do not add anything to the text. If he would, sorry. Well, the model I just shown here is called the concentric model. And again, signified and signifier can be understood as any 2 points on the linear sequence entailing movement between innermost and outermost. However, my focus right now in terms of this summary is precisely the reflexive act. Here we go again. The principle of self-identity. In the diagram above, format 1 represents the traditional relationship. The signified, the nominans, is mirrored by the signifier. The arrow indicates the originating function of the signified, which is most often understood to express itself by means of the signifier which mirrors it. Origination, in parenthesis, need not mean, of course, a temporally identifiable cause. It can just as well mean an ontological priority, or many other variants of begetting. Format 2 indicates what would be the case if the Derridian argument became artificially fixated in its first phase, conclusive evidence, even granting for the moment that such exists, showing the outer element, the alleged signifier, to be the real signified. The nominans would indeed force a victory for environmental determinism. But the format, while reversing roles, would still permit self-identity, though probably not free will, and would still be founded on the paradigm of signified and signifier. Format 3 indicates that the inner words and the outer words, the nominans and the nomen, may really relate to each other in a very complex co-originative way. The citation mark I utterance both mirrors the originating factor and is also mirrored by it. Many format 3 in one way or another when dealing with self-identity. Many more moderate contemporary theories of psychology, etc., advances format 3 in one way or another when dealing with self-identity. Its extension to a general theory of identity and relationships among identities has likewise flourished. Heidegger accomplishes this extension when the concept of hermeneutical circle in his Sein und Zeit transmutes into the motif of belonging together in his later work. We shall soon study the implication of these, but now it suffices to observe the obvious. That late phase Heideggerian thought as a philosophy of life is limited to a very small group of philosophers, poets, and their associates. Historically, it seems to me that among movements with a broad popular base, for instance Taoism, at its finest, most consciously, universally applied format 3, Derrida's vigorous rejection of format 3 in favor of format 4 we shall appraise anon. Format 4, of course, indicates the impasse to which Derrida claims logic and empirical data inevitably lead us, the integrity of the signified and signifier, or reflexivity itself, fragments. The nomen or the outward element in format 2 is no more a signified than the inner element is a signified. The outward element is a signified sous-rature. Since the model of language, which it presumes, can only hold together if it is a signifier, and even the inward element lacking a signified with which it can link in binary combination, cannot hold fast but must float. So is this holding fast, that sort of a crude reading, the crude reading of the text makes it likely, or it becomes that something you can assume by not reading as careful as Derrida does with his deconstructive mode. Once you get in and read very careful, you will see that there is a sort of a problem here. And once more, it's the clinging of the signifier to the signifier that you will notice is impossible. How could they cling? And how could one of these parts be more primary? And this is not solved by saying simply, well, of course, language was after the world. No, that is history, that is not Geschichte, like Heidegger would said. And also when we come to the hermeneutical circle in Zeit of Being and Time of Heidegger, we understand that there always, ever must be a pre-understanding. Otherwise, understanding is simply not possible. And this is not to be compared, like we would say in Swedish, to understand the workings of an engine we need to know maybe a smaller engine, or to understand a car's engine it would be a good thing to understand a moped engine. No, here's a full-blown picture of the reality, in all pieces, in all depth. And the more clear picture you have in your prior understanding, the better the interaction will be. And this is completely contrary to format 1, format 2 as well, I would say. This is not how we think about understanding or reading. Obviously, we think that's a biased take and an unnecessary take. And to have a clear idea of something you haven't even seen, why would you have to do that? And this goes to show how different conclusions actually deconstruction can lead to. Conclusions that you would never ever entered were you still in the sort of a logocentric take on reality. This is sort of undiscoverable by reading. And here comes the greatness of Jacques Derrida, because of his extremely careful reading and sort of repetitive way of pointing out, in the end, you understand you are doing the centering, and you somehow think it's necessary, and this centering would be the idea I read the text without any preconception. This is what I would say. That's my take on that. And this is clearly shown by Derrida. That wouldn't work. He doesn't prove it to false. He do something a lot more important. He shows that reality don't accept that, or it wouldn't work in reality. So the reason why we keep having the idea of the world being out there is partly because we have this idea we're going to see the world just as it is somehow, on a scale. And this is this lower idea of objectivity, a very shallow, superficial, but also hastily thought up idea. And it brings to mind this pre-ontological pre or firstness, could even be a sort of a causal effect, where the signified causes the signifier, or vice versa. This primary is very interesting. It's so well pointed out here, but there is always a primary, and that should be compared to the original image of the mirror. We start to think either that the signified is the prior in this sense, not necessarily causal, but in a pre-ontological sense, that the other thing is a bit later. And already there we made a centralism that will block out understanding. One thing gets prioritized and the other one gets shoved down or pushed down. And all of a sudden the text is going to take a sideways turn. It's going to be top heavy or bottom heavy or side heavy. It will not open up to itself because of this narrowing of awareness. It is quite literally an awareness narrowing process. And this is opened up by deconstruction. Deconstruction makes the text speak again. But deconstruction can only happen in the realm of the real, It is something you really do. And this is why I pointed out so many times that Heidegger by his hand understood, because it is a doing deconstruction. He rearranges the text. It is not something purely mental, and it not at all something purely physical. Neither is there combination. So all that centrism sort of slides away and open up an understanding of both deconstruction and the Saussurean text at the very same time. And I would say that is nothing short of absolute brilliance. That is extremely clever. Very hard to repeat, of course. I could never do that. And this is, of course, why we need Derrida to do this really weird thing from an academic viewpoint, not adding anything, not translating anything, not refer anything, none of those things. Instead, he goes to the very experience, and that is where all the fun happens. The argument of the doublemint you can read later on page 17, the last paragraph. It's still in the same chapter, between the Tao, Derridian differentialism. The argument of the doublemint has led, then, to the signified under erasure, since the logic of the linguistic model which found signifier and signified only allows the signified and all alleged signs to be pure signifiers. But Derrida's crucial maneuver at this point, and it must occur precisely here in the overall argument, is to perform a second, more massive crossing out. What Derrida does is in effect to simply shake us out of it, if you will. That is to exclaim, but how absurd our conclusion is! Exclamation mark. How can there be a pure signifier? Clearly, the concept of signifier is logically paired with that of signified! Exclamation mark. By definition, a signifier is a representation of a signified. So pure signifier too must come suratyr. Gallantly here. Not bad, Robert Magliola. And what has been the purpose of all our preceding argumentation then? Question mark. Derrida tells us straightforwardly, quote by Derrida, the primacy or priority in the sense, in parenthesis, in the sense we have used pure of the signifier would be an expression untenable and absurd to formulate illogically within the very logic that it would legitimately destroy. The signifier will never be rights precede the signifier, the signified, in which case it would no longer be a signifier, and the signifying signifier would no longer have a possible signified. The thought that is announced in this impossible formula without being successfully contained therein should therefore be stated in another way. Brilliant. Nothing short of brilliant. Derrida's enterprise, strictly speaking, amounts to the destroying concept of sign and its entire logic. But far from being an exercise in futility, Derrida's enterprise has been to show that a persistent appraisal of the theory of signifier and signified, on which, after all, the alleged signs are really pure signifiers, in visum, since pure signifiers are impossible. The whole theory of sign, of signified and signifier, whether it is a function in the principle of identity or in the principle of personal self-identity, or in formal linguistics itself, is null and void. Recall, however, Derrida's observation concerning the pure signifier. The thought that is announced in this impossible formula without being successfully contained therein should therefore be stated in another way. Derrida will have other ways of stating the thought, though necessarily none of them will be adequate. At this juncture, though Derrida's other way of stating it is his resort to quotation marks, or better still, to the crossing out. Under the mark of the X, the word's pure signifier and the concept they represent can still be somehow apprehended. You can still see them. That is to say, the concept of pure signifier is somehow on those closer examinations of the ways things really are. The concept of pure signifier, at least for the present, is the best we can do within our order of thinking. So, this is true brilliance once more. And I understand it so much better in the words of Magliola. That's why I would say he's one of these great translators or traducers or mediator of the Derridian thinking. And it is that Derrida approaches us on the level we are. That is very important. If he would have gone too high up, we would never be able to understand deconstruction on the real level. So he approaches us, and that's a didactic style of Derrida, and that is definitely intended by Derrida himself. He wanted to help, and deconstruction is nothing but a helping tool. This is what truly helps. This is the real McCoy, the thing that works. And we can trust the method to do its job. It will always already do its job. As long as we keep our eyes open, we need not to be convinced. Actually, convincing is not part of it. We will see it for ourselves, because we have to see it for ourselves. Here, conviction just does not work. See, Derrida would never be happy himself if we said, well, I'm convinced now you're correct or wrong or anything like that. No, that would not do the trick. It's very important that it is shown and that the reader of Derrida and his deconstruction actually understands. So, a great idea. Well, I say that's quite enough because this is rather complicated. But just going through this will help. You don't have to understand. Understanding will come later, and it's a different sort of understanding. It's a reality understanding. Sort of, to be a bit sketchy here, we go beyond words. But that's not actually true. We go before words in a way. Or we rather investigate if it could be such a thing as a beforeness. Yeah, I think that's most correct. So, you see, I learned by going along here. I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye-bye for now.